In the previous videos, we have learnt about the need for post-processing and the features of enhancement and corrections. In this video, we're going to learn about the basic workflow that can be used to process the images. Mr. Saravanan Janakarajan is going to use some of his work as examples to explain this in detail. Let's go over to him.
In the previous videos, we have seen what is post-processing. We have seen the various features of post-processing, and we have also seen the various features for corrections. Now, I will explain to you a workflow for post-processing. There are multiple ways to process a picture in any software of your choice. There is not one correct way or one rule by which you have to follow, and there are many softwares also. So here we will take an example of Photoshop CC and do a basic workflow. This is a basic workflow which I follow. You can have your own workflows. Whatever suits you, you can follow. But in this workflow, I will touch upon each of the features we have talked in the various previous videos and explain to you how they will affect a picture. So we'll start with a basic workflow where you open your file. I am assuming it's a raw file. It can be a JPEG file also, but assuming that's a raw file, opening a raw file in Camera Raw, correcting the white balance, then opening the raw file in Photoshop. Then we'll get into something called as a layer creation and layer naming. Then get into the various features we discussed in previous video like levels correction, shadow and highlights, hue and saturation, noise reduction, sharpening, and then how we save the file. So let's start with the workflow. So once you open a raw file, the raw file is opened in a software before Photoshop. That software is called as Camera Raw. Now Camera Raw also has all these enhancement features which I am talked about in Photoshop. You can do that in Camera Raw itself, like many people do that. But I would like to explain the layer feature to you and the advantage of layers to you so that that becomes a habit. And it might take a little bit of more time, but there are various advantages with layers. So it is better to do the most of the corrections in Photoshop than in Camera Raw. One particular enhancement feature which I want you to do in Camera Raw itself is adjust the white balance, because Camera Raw opens the raw file and it is easier to adjust the white balance in the Camera Raw itself. Now you see the temperature slider, and this is where you can slide the temperature to hot or to cool and thereby get the exact color cast for the image which you had shot. And once you have done that, you can press open and the file will open in Photoshop. Once the raw file is open in Photoshop, the layer is by default named as background layer and is a logged layer. So it is logged for safety purposes. You can unlock it, but I would always suggest that you create something called as a duplicate layer. And this can be done by Ctrl J or Command J, or you can go to the layer option in the top bar and use duplicate layer option. Now what is layer? Layers are sheets of image stacked on one on the other. The content of bottom sheet can be seen through transparent areas in the sheet above it. Each layer can be adjusted for transparency and opacity. Layers are used for non-destructive editing of images. In case one performs multiple editing tasks on an image with each task in separate layers, then any mistake or correction in one layer will not affect the other layers. So it means that if you have done 10 different editing tasks and suppose your fourth or fifth task is wrong, or you don't need that task, you just have to remove that layer without starting from scratch. If layers are not used, then any mistake at any point of processing will render the whole processing useless and we'll have to start the whole process from beginning. That's why to have layers is a good way of doing for processing. Once you have created a layer, you have to name it appropriately, because then you will know that what particular work you have done on the layer. So for example, I have created a layer and I have named it as levels. To rename the layer, you just have to go on the layer and you have to do a right click and the layer name will get highlighted. You just have to type in your name, the layer name, and the layer name gets formed there. For the levels adjustment, you have to go to image on the menu bar, and from there you have to go to adjustment. From adjustment you have to choose the levels, or the shortcut is Ctrl L or Command L. This will give you a histogram of the picture, and the edges which are clipping the brightest and darkest limit can be drawn in. This is how the histogram of the picture will look like, and as you see, this end marked A is the shadows, and the other extreme end marked C is the highlights, and the one in the middle is midtones. So you can draw this slider in from either sides and thereby adjust your clippings of shadows and highlights. This will make the picture brighter or darker depending on the adjustment you make. The next adjustment you have to make is called as shadows and highlights. So as usual, we will create a layer by using Ctrl J or Command J, and then rename it as highlight and shadows, because that is what we are going to work on. Then again go to image. In image you go to adjustment. In adjustment you go to shadows and highlights. As we have in the previous video we saw what shadows and highlights are. We will have to open up the shadows, and once you press shadows and highlights, this is the kind of sliders you'll get. You'll get shadows, highlights and midtones. So you can adjust them by increasing or decreasing the slider. I would always suggest that you keep the radius at 30% or 30 pixels or less, and the tone less than 50%. Don't exceed 50%, whereas you can adjust the amount slider. So this will help you in terms of adjusting your shadows and highlights of the image. Level of enhancement is hues and saturations. Like we saw in the previous lesson, that hues and saturation are basically the color of the image. Here again we have created a new level and new layer, and that layer is named as colors. And as you go into the option, you will see that you have hue, saturation and lightness. Lightness is basically luminosity. Here in Photoshop is called lightness. So here you again can move the slider up and down on the brightness to darkness for lightness slider. In saturation you can increase or decrease the saturation, and in hue you can change the color. So in this option you have to be very, very true to the picture, the image you saw before as you clicked it, because you can do a lot of experiments here and get the picture completely wrong in terms of colors. So you have to ensure that the color which you saw with your eyes is what you are reproducing here. This is completely basis your interpretation of what picture you saw. Once you have done that, we have to look at reducing noise. Like we discussed, noise is inherent in any digital image you take. So you have to reduce noise. Now I will discuss on how to reduce noise within Photoshop. There are other dedicated softwares to reduce noise also, but here we'll look at features within Photoshop where you can reduce noise. So you have to go to the filter option. In filter option, go to noise, and in noise you have a reduce noise option. You just have to use the reduce noise option and you will get the various sliders. You have to use the sliders up and down to figure out how much noise you have to reduce, and you have to reduce the noise as per your liking. One thing you have to remember in all the enhancement features or correction features is that there is no perfect number, or there is no correct number or limits. It is completely left to the person who is doing post-processing. The only point I would like to make is that be true to your image, keep the integrity of image as sacrosanct. So you don't change the image in terms of color or in terms of introducing elements in the image, and try to make the image look better using shadows, removing the shadows or increase the contrast or brightening the colors. That is fine. There is no perfect number for it. Hence I will not be able to tell you how much of number you have to feed in for noise or for shadows or for levels. That is completely left to the person who is doing post-processing. Now for sharpening, you have to again go to filter, choose sharpen, and then in sharpen you have an unsharpen mask. Don't go by the name as unsharpen. It is the mask which is used to sharpen your image. In unsharpened mask, you have 3 sliders. You have amount, you have radius, you have threshold. And here again, I would play with the amount slider rather than the radius and threshold. And here again, it is completely left to the person who is doing post-processing how much to sharpen the image. Please remember, as I told you in the previous sessions, that as you reduce the noise, you will soften the image, and as you sharpen the image, you will add noise. So you have to have a balance so that your image is looking sharp, but at the same time the noise in the image is tolerable. So this is the final file which you have got after doing the whole workflow, starting from level correction up to sharpening. Now how do you save the file? You go to File, Save As. In Save As you have various options. You will get a drop down list of right from Photoshop, which is a PSD file, up to a TIFF file. There are various formats you can save as. So I usually save my files as PSD and also as JPEG. PSD because if I want to reprocess the image, retouch the image, so PSD file will mean that I can just open the image and go to the layer where I want to do the work and do it. And if when I do save it as a JPEG, then all these layers are compressed together and one single image called JPEG is given to me. So when I open an image as PSD, all the layers are there. When I open an image as JPEG, I will not get any layers. So this is the difference. So if in case we are saving the image as a JPEG, then if you choose the JPEG option, you will get a screen like this where you can then tell what quality of image you want to save. So highest quality is 12, lowest quality is 2. As the quality is high, you will get the image size, the file size is also very high. So a high quality image at 12 will be 4.6 megapixels. And if you are going to reduce the file, if you want a smaller file, reduce the file size, then you can reduce the quality of the image, which will reduce the file size also. So it depends on you on what option of JPEG you want to save. Once you have given save, give OK, then the file will be saved as JPEG. I hope this workflow is very clear to you in terms of how to process an image and how to correct the small blemishes in the image. I would like to again remind you that Photoshop or any post-processing software is very addictive. You can do wonders with it because you can digitally alter the image also. But as a photojournalist, as a photographer, as a wildlife photographer especially, or as a photojournalist especially, the integrity of image is very, very important. You can enhance, you can correct, but please don't do alteration to your images because many publications, exhibitions or competitions do not accept an altered image. I hope the workflow is clear and I'm sure you will try it on your images and find your images better than what it came out of camera. Thank you.
This concludes the lesson on the basics of photo editing, workflow and post-processing. You need to be aware of the various features that are possible, but most importantly, you need to know that you cannot manipulate or change the picture that has been taken. As a photojournalist, we must portray the truth as it is, and therefore we are responsible to give the picture with maybe some color correction or enhancement, but not by changing the nature of the photograph. The workflow can vary from person to person and depends on their preferences. What is important is having a workflow in place that can help you to work more efficiently. If you have organized your work, then you can meet deadlines smoothly and you can work in a manner where you know where your work is, and without saving time and energy, you can give the output. We hope that you found this lesson useful. We will meet soon.